Thanks so much, Hudson, for that introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm coming to you today from Camaragal land, so pay respects to elders past, present, emerging, and a shout out to any of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the line today. I'm lucky enough to be the chair of Working Group 1. Our purpose is around increasing demand. Our hope is that we can send clear, consistent, and significantly increased demand signals for low and no embodied carbon materials to the market so that suppliers can be confident in investing in decarbonisation innovation. So this is a purpose we set ourselves over a year ago now that we've been working towards in our working group. We are a constantly growing group. I lose track of how many are in the team at the moment. We've got over 50. We're predominantly from various levels of government, consultants and head contractors. We don't have many suppliers in our group. We tend to fall more into that sort of part of MECLA. So let me share with you a little bit of how are we trying to increase that demand. So after we agreed that purpose, the journey we've been on so far has gone through a couple of different stages. Initially, we were trying to work out who do we need to influence to increase demand for low and no embodied carbon materials. And through a series of surveys and polls, we settled on policymakers, government clients, non-government clients, and designers. And so we've been trying to work out how do we, as MECLA, encourage those people who fall into those categories to increase their ask for low and no embodied carbon materials. So we brainstormed a whole series of ideas. We had over 100. We got them down to 13. We tested those 13 with people in the MECLA membership and also in New South Wales government. And we chose 4 initiatives to focus on, which we've formed some subgroups around, and they put together plans, and we've been actioning those for the last 12 months. So I'll take you through those. We also recently held a 1 year in reflection, and we're considering 3 new possible subgroups. So if we go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about the 4 active subgroups that we've had in the past year. These on the screen. So we've had one subgroup looking at this idea of a pledge prerequisite. So this is a concept of establishing a policy to require head contractors to have a public commitment to reducing embodied carbon as a prerequisite to be able to tender for government work. So that was our first idea, and the group have been working on that. Our second idea was to really look into this whole area of measurement and disclosure, and including a requirement for new buildings to assess and disclose embodied carbon outcomes as part of a building code or planning requirements. So that was another idea we had. The third idea we had was around deviating from a specification or a brief that you've been given. And here it was requesting that clients map the approval process for that deviation to occur, because often it's very difficult to understand how you can put in a non-conforming idea into a government bid scenario, and that's curbing the potential for there to be low and no embodied carbon solutions tabled. And our last area that we looked at was a toolkit, some sort of online toolkit to support the policymakers and clients to understand embodied carbon and set policy. So let me go through on the next slide just a little bit more around each of those. So the idea behind the pledge, we'll look at that one first. This was a concept where governments who have a massive pipeline of work could use the power of that by having a prerequisite for being able to tender to any head contractor that comes in, that they must have some sort of pledge to reduce embodied carbon for their organisation. That pledge could be of their own design. It could be a very simple pledge that really has very little impact at all commercially on their organisation, such as a percentage of cementitious replacement in every concrete mix that they do. Or it could be quite a complex pledge to say be a 1.5 degree aligned organisation and using science-based targets, or somewhere in between. But our suggestion has been to policymakers that they require every head contractor to have some sort of pledge, so that we all are starting to learn about embodied carbon and talk about it. So we've been taking that idea on tour. We drafted a sort of policy, and we've aired that with various state bodies and agencies in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, etc. You can see the list there, federal level as well. And then we've at the moment got two states who are considering quite seriously including this concept in their future procurement policy, and we hope to be able to make an announcement about one of them imminently. So that group has been very active, just basically taking that concept on tour. Even where the pledge itself hasn't been perhaps adopted, one of the things that we have found is that even just having the conversation about it has started to have a lot of those agencies learn more and think more about embodied carbon. The second group that was looking at measure and disclosure, I think it's important to give a bit of context. So at the time, they thought their core strategy was going to be review the current policies and plans, and then workshop, potential regulators, administrators, and lobby them and propose a suitable framework. Unbeknownst to us, at the same time as we were thinking about it, the neighbours group were also then starting to work on their tool. So one of the things that this group has done has met then with various government bodies to try and understand, does neighbours feel that the new neighbours tool fill that need that they had identified? And in most cases, we think it will, but there have been some gaps identified for where the neighbours tool doesn't touch certain types of typologies in our sector that you can't get a neighbours rating for. So there may be some gaps that this group would continue then to work with around that whole measurement and disclosure, but also perhaps encouraging how the disclosure element will come into play once the neighbours tool lands. The Deviate group, again, had been looking at who are the key decision makers behind deciding whether you can or can't deviate from a specification. And they've been testing, they thought that they would go through a process of testing certain approaches with them, which is what they've been doing. So that group has a couple of deviation pilot projects where they've been working alongside some of the decision makers in various agencies. And they've presented some case studies, particularly one around where John Holland Group had managed to orchestrate a deviation. And then lastly, our toolkit group were very interested to understand what sort of support might head contractors need to be able to adopt an embodied carbon target pledge. And so they conducted a series of interviews with 7 different head contractors to try and understand what they already do. And they've mapped some content that would be relevant to be included on the website and the toolkit. They've bounce that with working group 3 and 4 who are looking at that website, and they're going to be gifting that piece of work to group 3 and 4 to pursue. If we go to the next slide, just the last thing I wanted to share with you is, in addition to those 4 things that we've been working over the past year, we've come up with 3 possible new ideas that are being developed at the moment, and at our next meeting we're going to be deciding whether we will be recommending these move forward. The first is to focus on local council. So here the idea is to support local council officers who investigate the measurement and reduction of embodied carbon in their council capital works plan. We know that we're sort of targeting them potentially as a unique government client, and they have a huge amount of work that obviously involves products that have embodied carbon, and often they don't have the same sort of depth of access to specialists, etc. And so we were trying to think about how we might be able to better support local councils on their decarbonisation journey. The second idea that we're considering as a new possibility was a readiness index. This was born out of all the conversations we've had with agencies who sometimes are hesitant to place a demand for low embodied carbon outcomes on the market because they're worried industry isn't ready. And so we did get a bit of feedback that they were saying, oh, if we ask industry to do this, will that make it really difficult for them to participate in our tenders? Is that a step too far? And they were actually deeply underestimating the readiness we felt of the market. And so our thought was that we could prepare and share some sort of readiness index or dashboard that has evidence of where the industry is at in terms of its readiness to use low or no embodied carbon materials, so that they're more confident to ask for them. And we're thinking that that might be something where we could perhaps work with a credible researcher to create some sort of survey that recurs on a regular basis, that's issued to suppliers and MECLA and head contractors, etc., that test readiness, that might look at numbers of projects that are already in progress with embodied carbon reduction targets, or a percentage of products that are in the market, etc. So we're tinkering with that idea. And the third idea we're tinkering with is around planning incentives. This always comes up. How can we encourage planners, often at that local council level, to adopt mechanisms that would incentivize organisations who are seeking planning approval to drive lower embodied carbon outcomes. So it's pretty easy to think of the incentives. They could be things like a financial penalty or a financial benefit for low embodied carbon outcomes, or it could even be additional area that you're able to build to if you've got low embodied carbon outcomes. The tricky part is working out how do you encourage planners to adopt those and finance those kind of new ideas. So these are the three possibilities that we've got that we may add to our suite. And then we'll be doing a little bit of a subgroup spill and reorganizing ourselves around the new suite of subgroups. That's it for working group 1.